Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. For more exciting content, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Today we look at one of the most dangerous criminal families to ever exist in the UK criminal underworld. A family that held the Manchester criminal underworld with such a tight grip that the effects are still felt to this day. Consisting of three brothers, Desmond, the enforcer and hitman, Dominic, the charismatic but predatory entrepreneur, and Damien, who it was said was the level-headed but very powerful leader of the family. The siblings had set out to build their criminal empire through the brutal violence, and this would include stabbings, shootings and even sexual assaults. In this video we will detail the beginnings of the siblings and their early life, and how they grew up to live a life of crime, one that would result in them becoming the rulers of Manchester's criminal underworld. Growing up in the Nunan family was a big one, with 14 children within the family altogether, and each child had a name that began with the letter D. This was a reference to Dublin and the Irish roots of their parents. It's believed that the brothers' ability to commit terrifying and brutal crimes were a product of being brought up in the decaying city of Manchester within the 1970s and 80s. The trio, Damien, Dessie and Dominic, started out working as security at the Hacienda nightclub, where they would become known and respected as the top hardmen of the city and began selling drugs to the local partygoers. The Hacienda quickly became known as a cult spot in the city, hosting big names like Madonna to play at the venue, and being such a busy nightclub it was a good place for any criminal gang looking to make a lot of money from drug dealing. This allowed the brothers to sell their own drugs and take cuts from other gangs who were looking to sell inside to pocket up to 50 grand a night, and market themselves as one of Manchester's most established criminal families, a title and privilege they would and did kill to protect. Bob Dunbar, who worked for Greater Manchester Police at the time, said the Noonan brothers were involved with gang culture, drugs and beatings. It became almost a local legend that if you went to a club in Manchester, the brothers in some way would be on or involved in the security at the door. Another former member of the Greater Manchester Police, Martin Harding, claimed the Noonans were synonymous with violence. They displayed very little fear of anyone. They most certainly had no fear of the authorities, and most definitely no fear of going to prison. They were not scared to use violence at any time or any place. Hopefully the brothers had built themselves a brutal reputation, one that would control the streets of Manchester for a very long time. In their spare time, the brothers would also target security vans that were picking up money from local businesses in and around Manchester, where they would disguise themselves with tights pulled over their heads and would proceed to violently push the drivers to the floor before ransacking the van for cash. Journalist Donald McIntyre speculates that the brothers and their associates made an estimated £5 to £6 million from these cash-in-transit robberies. However, a key event in the brothers' criminal organisation was a murder that nearly brought the foundations for their kingdom they had built crumbling down. This was the murder of the flamboyant White Tony Johnson. Mr. Johnson was a leader of the Cheetham Hill gang and drove a white Ford Sierra Cosworth. His shooting was in the car park of the Penny Black pub in February 1991, and it was big news, and after a police investigation, Desmond Nunan went on trial for his murder. But the first trial that was held collapsed amid rumours of jury tampering. However, at the second trial, after all the evidence was heard, Dessie Nunan was acquitted. It had been alleged that Mr. Johnson was killed after a fallout between rival gangs about how £350,000, which was the proceeds from a robbery that had been committed by both, were divided up and split amongst its members. Despite the death of their rival leader bringing an end to any opposing organised crime families in Manchester, the Noonans ultimately benefited as their position was strengthened, and they expanded their operations to other cities, despite increased police surveillance of their activities. It is said that the brothers had acquired business interests in nightclubs in Liverpool, London and Newcastle. Desmond Nunan also tried whenever he was free to do deals in other cities with other gangland figures, and was soon becoming involved with several crime bosses, including the Liverpool drugs baron Mr. Curtis Warren, and the head of one of Newcastle's biggest criminal organisations, Mr. Paddy Conroy. And due to the strength and power of the Nunan family, Desmond was able to be a prime peacemaker in the Manchester gang truces, which for a short period of time brought the war in Moss Side to an end. Another event that took place was very important in this story of the gang, and includes an attempt to overtake the doors at the Hacienda nightclub by another rival gang from South Manchester. This attempt was brutally suppressed by the Noonan brothers, and in retaliation, Dominic called at the rival gang's local pub and used a machete to decapitate one of their dogs that were outside. He then walked into the pub and placed the head on the pool table, making it clear that anyone who was thinking about it should think twice before having any ideas that they would try and take over anything that belonged to the Noonans. Despite their vicious nature, the brothers had always made sure they played an active role within their community. In Mosside, they offered help to the local community by setting up their own makeshift police station in a disused building. They did not require payment in most cases, but acted as vigilantes who required nothing more than a cooked breakfast to sort out any bother. There's also footage of Dominic sitting with families and their children, who served them a feast of bacon and eggs as thanks, many oblivious at this point to his vile, predatory character. Each member of the trio was known for their notorious reputation, with the last remaining brother of the trio, Dominic, facing the consequences of his actions to this day. Desmond Nunan was, after the death of Damien, the notorious head of the Nunan criminal firm, was known as Dessie to the family and friends. When asked on camera by reporter Donald McIntyre how many murders police suspected he was responsible for, saying he heard it was around 24, Dessie Nunan broke into a broad smile before signalling with hand gestures at a real total of 27. He was a lifelong Irish Republican and anti-fascist, shown by his activities he did within the Anti-National Front, squads of the early 1980s, and then with Anti-Fascist Action, which was formed in 1985. His last known anti-fascist work was canvassing the BNP British National Party when they stood in Newton Heath in 2002. He shows a significant danger to Manchester's criminal underworld, being the gangland enforcer for his criminal career and openly admitting to his involvement alongside his brothers in the murder of 22-year-old gangster White Tony Johnson in February 1991. The shooting of White Tony was thought to be part of a battle for control of the hard drugs market in Manchester. And although Desmond was able to walk free from the murder case, he was unable to do so 2 years later when he was one of the group that left twin brothers battered and bleeding outside a nightclub. A witness of the event described the then 36-year-old as acting like a complete psycho. Dessie Nunan, however, pleaded guilty this time and was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in jail for violent disorder and causing grievous bodily harm. And by May 1988 was convicted again of perverting the course of justice and wounding. One charge involved making threats of violence and death towards prosecution witnesses and relatives in an attempt to stop evidence being given at court, where the witnesses were police officers. He lived the last few years of his life as the father of 2 with an addiction to crack cocaine and booze, despite the best efforts of his brothers and wife Sandra to make him kick the habit. Dominic Noonan was one of the most notorious UK criminal underworld figures of the last 30 years, especially in Manchester, but it was also revealed later that he was also a sex offender. Dominic Nunan worked with his brothers to head their criminal firm and more than 40 convictions for a wide range of offences. These include armed robbery, police assault, possession of firearms, prison escape, and fraud, as well as recent charges of indecent assault and attempted rape. Despite having revelled in a gangster reputation, his notoriety has been enough to influence some young men and manipulate others. This can be seen from the many victims who have come forward to describe some of his heinous actions. His first victim was aged just 10 when Mr. Nunan, who was 6 years older, took him from a care home and indecently assaulted him twice, ordering the boy not to tell anyone. Dominic Nunan also had a second victim who claimed to be 16 or 17 when he first met Mr. Nunan outside a pizzeria. He detailed how Mr. Nunan threatened him, accusing him of having called him gay before he was beaten by a gang of teens with hockey sticks, and then indecently assaulted by Mr. Nunan on a few occasions, once in a disused shop. In his early teens in the 2000s, when he met Mr. Nunan, a third victim stated how he had been molested on 20 or more occasions and described how he would spend time driving around with Mr. Nunan and other young lads and would attend parties where there was drink and drugs. Mr. Nunan would ply them with drink, but not to get drunk himself, and his victim described being brainwashed into thinking the abuse was normal. A fourth victim also said that he was under the spell of Mr. Nunan, aged in his mid-teens when he met him in the 2000s, agreeing to renovate a pub for him. In 2010, a rape charge was dropped, and shortly after, Dominic Noonan was released from a long prison sentence on a licence. He was accused of raping a woman in a hotel room after celebrating his birthday, but prosecutors dropped the case. Mr. Nunan was cleared of child rape charges in 2013 after the court heard his accuser, a boy of 15 who claimed to have been molested in a flat in Bloom Street in Manchester city centre, had a history of making false complaints. In 2016, Noonan was found not guilty of engaging in a sex act in front of a minor, although he was convicted of perverting the course of justice by offering £5,000 to the boy's family to get the charge dropped. The prosecution alleged that the boy was made to cover his face with a poster as a vulnerable adult man was intimidated into performing a sex act on Mr. Nunan in a bedroom. Mr. Nunan was also convicted of arson and blackmail connected to a row over an ice cream van and jailed for 11 years. However, despite his predatory nature, he was not your usual crime boss. Although he was certainly a cunning intellectual individual, he has trumpeted that he is an anti-racist and has made much of being able to speak Urdu, although he only knows a few phrases. He is also a homosexual. Over the years, Greater Manchester Police have found little difficulty in obtaining evidence to lock him up for everything from possessing a gun to arson and blackmail, and in fact he has spent most of his adult life behind bars. Even though this has been the case, Dominic Nunan was recalled to prison again in 2011, suspected of being a ringleader during that summer's riots in Manchester, due to a video depicting him talking to a looter who was carrying a large flat-screen TV on Oldham Street in the height of the riot. Mr. Nunan enjoyed playing cat and mouse with the law, as prison authorities struggled to cope with him, and some prison governors just did not want to have to deal with him as they saw it as a big problem for whoever's custody he was in. There was even a stage where he was housed in the Special Intervention Unit for troublesome prisoners at Strangeways. He was there together with Kieran Psycho Stapleton, a member of the wider Noonan family, who murdered student Anuj Bidvi in Salford, and Clifton Jetter, who committed a gruesome knife murder in Brighton before attacking 2 guards at the Manchester prison. In the summer of 2014, Mr. Nunan brought Manchester city centre to a standstill while out of prison on licence, by climbing the city's big wheel in protest at the latest efforts to recall him, gathering more than 1,000 spectators at the time. This drama meant that roads were closed, buses were diverted and businesses had to shut, losing an estimated £10,000 in trade. Furthermore, the council and police leaders were infuriated, and Mr. Nunan was charged with causing a public nuisance for his 6-hour disruption 100 feet above the ground, which was later thrown out by the judge, who said that the wrong charge had been laid and that he had suspected the charge had only been made because this offence carried a stiffer sentence than the alternative, aggravated trespass. Around this time, one of Mr. Nunan's friends, who grew up in the same street in Whalley Range, was his right-hand man for many years. They saw what others had seen for a long time, that Mr. Nunan may be a predatory sex offender. He witnessed Mr. Nunan surround himself with an entourage of teens who turned up in force for court appearances, and this man began to feel uncomfortable with what he is seeing. Even telling a news reporter as much as on one occasion being asked how he felt. Being a father himself, he fell out with Dominic after a confrontation with Mr. Nunan. Some of his descriptions include stating, "I remember this lad, he was 13, Mr. Nunan was waiting for him to come home from school. This lad sat on his knee and was told to call him Uncle Dom. He gave this lad a £5. He gave 50p pieces to some other lads. He brought them ice cream." The man also recalls how another lad was 14 and Dom said to call him Dad and he would be kissing him. "I told him he shouldn't be doing that, and he was just out of prison and I told him he shouldn't be doing it. It just wasn't right." Claims from the man state how he believed that Mr. Nunan was taking the piss and said that he felt uncomfortable about the situation. He even said he told his children never to be on their own with Mr. Nunan. Furthermore, the man said Dom never had a best mate. I wouldn't have put him down as a best mate either, and that when things started falling into place, I thought this isn't just persecution. I just felt very uncomfortable. Him kissing lads who were 13 and 14, it was very, very uncomfortable. It was staring me in the face. Overall, Dominic's actions ultimately meant that his brothers even saw him as an embarrassment, to the point where he even changed his name to Dominic Latterly Footfoy by deed poll, where his adopted surname is an acronym for Look After Those That Look After You, F Off Those That F Off You. and that he now faces the punishment for his diabolical crimes, to which his longtime ex-friend says he deserves everything he gets. Lastly, Damian Nunan. There is a lack of information on Damien. However, it is known and accepted by many that he was a key factor in the success and reputation of the Noonan criminal empire. Damian Nunan was known for being the main part of the trio, and everyone respected him. He had no trouble organising or taking part in the crimes the brothers and their criminal gang committed within the criminal underworld, and he was known to be very good at cash-in-transit robberies. Although there is a lack of information about what crimes he committed or took part in during his lifetime, Damian Nunan's death played a significant part in the end of the rule of the Nunan brothers over Manchester, which leads us to the end of their empire. During a space of 8 months, the Nunan criminal empire slowly began to crumble, with Damian's death happening in 2004. The respect and trust that the other gangsters had in regards to Damien and his brothers started to deteriorate. Damian Nunan died in a motorcycle accident while on holiday in the Dominican Republic, and on his colossal black and gold headstone, the family inscribed, "Our family chain is broken / nothing seems to be the same." A friend of Damien's, Paddy Doherty, who was also a bare knuckle boxer and TV personality, says the minute Damien died, they weren't half as powerful as they thought they were. He was the gangster of gangsters in Greater Manchester, the influence. Fear and respect the family enjoyed on the streets at that time was signalled by the size of Damien's send-off, which had posters that went up in town advertising the arrangements. Hundreds gathered on the streets of Salford where he lived, to watch his coffin being carried on a horse and carriage led by an 18-piece bagpipe band, followed by a wagon full of floral tributes, and a mass was broadcast on PA to those who could not get into the All Souls RC Church in Weast for the service, before burial at St Joseph's Cemetery in Moston. Then, in March 2005, Dessie Nunan also lost his life after being stabbed to death by a crack dealer. At the time, Dessie had been consumed by an out-of-control alcohol and crack cocaine addiction. His killer was Yardie Derek McDoofus, a part-time DJ who was born in Manchester but raised in Jamaica. It was known that the arguments and threats had gone back and forth between the pair, with there being one occasion where Derek told Dessie, "Fuck off, I'll kill you." Many drug dealers have been told by his brothers to not sell drugs to Dessie, so Dessie tried to circumvent this ban by sending his friends to buy the drugs. On the night of March 18th, Dessie drunkenly shambled to get his drugs himself after not finding anyone to go purchase them for him. Mr. McDoofus, who determined to show he was not scared of the bigger man with a dangerous reputation, went out with a kitchen knife and confronted him. A fight broke out with Mr. McDoofus ultimately pushing a knife into Dessie before leaving him in the streets to die. Before his death, Dessie Nunan managed to call his wife and tell her he had been stabbed, hence how he was found bleeding on the pavement from a stomach wound. Following a trial at Preston Crown Court, Mr. McDoofus, then 41, was found guilty of murder and jailed for life with a minimum of 15 years to serve before parole. It was reported that he was battered so badly upon arrival to the station that he was hospitalised for weeks before he could go to prison. It was also thought he might have been permanently segregated from other prisoners. On the other hand, Dessie Nunan was given a big send-off with a 25-piece pipe band, drummers and a horse-drawn carriage, topped with white flowers bearing the coffin, at St Aidan's, Northenden, and then Southern Cemetery, Chorlton in the family tradition. Also in the cortege, 15 black Daimlers filled with red and white floral tributes and wreaths which said, "The Boss, Uncle, Our Kid and Des," and 2 local schools, St Thomas Aquinas and Chorlton High, closed for the day following police advice about the scale of the event. Dominic commented on this by saying the police totally overreacted, and that Dessie wouldn't have wanted the schools to close, there was just no need. There was a turnout of more than 5,000 mourners. Senior Detective Sean Donnellan, who led the investigation into Desmond Nunan's death, certainly thought there was a cautionary tale in it, saying that Desmond Nunan lived a violent and often illegal life. He had a detrimental effect on many people around him, either directly or by association. He considered himself to be a powerful person within the criminal underworld, declaring himself untouchable to television cameras. Yet he died addicted to drugs, lying on the pavement, having had an argument with a drug dealer. Therefore, there is a sense of irony in the death of this once powerful and dominant gangster. Having experienced the loss of his two brothers, Dominic was hit badly by the deaths, and according to the journalist Donald McIntyre, was now a man at sea. His dark secrets of paedophilia had always been suspected by many others, and now Dominic was weaker, having lost the two most powerful forces in his life. However, despite his losses, he still managed to exert influence and command loyalty in inner city areas, and become a street provocateur. Due to his reputation, he became confident that his rumours that he abused boys would never come to anything. However, he became so feeble that he was incapable of handling the backlash, or had the power he once had to cover up the allegations, and in 2015 he was jailed for 11 years for arson, blackmail, and perverting the course of justice. He now also faces the aftermath of being a paedophile and faces time for his sex offences, which he had denied. Having been convicted of all of them, another 11 years was added to his sentence. Therefore, being the last remaining brother of the trio, he is likely to face the rest of his adulthood behind bars, meaning the Nunan Empire has been fully toppled. Overall, the Nunan Empire has left its mark on the city of Manchester, due to the notoriety of the brothers. It can be seen how they started in the economic depression of Manchester and fought against the odds to rise, finding a niche in crime, particularly drug dealing, to increase their reputation. From there, they could expand their empire by putting up with rival gangs and even forming relations with the gangsters of other busy cities. Ultimately, their formidable brutal standing became well known, only for it to all go to pieces after the death of Damien and then Dessie. Dominic, being the only one remaining, was unable to cope with his losses and as a result had to face the punishment of imprisonment for his crimes and paedophilic behaviour. Since there are no longer any Nunan brothers available to rebirth and regrow the empire they once had, it can be said that they were the three brothers who had their peak, ruled much of Manchester and set up a destructive dynasty, the likes of which we are unlikely to ever see again. Their status has even resulted in documentaries such as the one by Donald McIntyre called A Very British Gangster, which even included Dessie Nunan boasting of being behind 27 killings and Dominic saying he was gay. Another programme called At Home with the Noonans features Stephen Warburton or Bugsy Nunan alongside his father Dominic. Mr. Warburton had been taped boasting of an Audi A6 he had stolen in a call to a friend serving time, which resulted in his arrest and a jail time of 38 months for being part of a £250,000 car ring conspiracy. Concludingly, it can be seen how although the brothers all came to their demise and their rule of terror diminished, Dominic, Damien and Dessie will forever hold a piece of history in Manchester, the town they made their own. The crimes committed by the Nunan brothers will never be forgotten in the UK criminal underworld. Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and a share, and leave any thoughts or suggestions you have in the comments section. We love to read through them all. And if you're new but enjoy UK true crime content, then subscribe to see when our newest video releases. And as always, stay safe.